The first laugh came sharp and loud, slicing through the morning air like a bad shot. It echoed across the firing range, followed by others, softer but no less cutting. The colonel didn't laugh, he smirked. A slow, knowing curl of the lips as his eyes dropped to the rifle in her hands, painted red, scarred with use, unmistakably out of place among the matte black precision weapons lined up on the racks. He tilted his head and said calmly, "That thing won't even reach half the distance." No one noticed her fingers tighten. No one noticed her breathing slow. Captain Ilara Voss stood alone at lane 7, boots planted in gravel that still held the night's cold. She had learned long ago that silence could be louder than protest. Words had failed her too many times, at the academy, in briefings, in rooms where she was always the only woman and often the youngest officer. So she said nothing. She simply checked the wind flags, the haze along the valley, the barely perceptible shimmer of heat rising off stone 3 kilometers away. The range stretched out like a challenge written by the earth itself. The target, a steel silhouette no bigger than a human chest, sat at 3,800 meters, nearly impossible by standard doctrine. This was a demonstration day, meant to reinforce hierarchy, not shatter it. The colonel had already decided the outcome. The observers, commanders, instructors, visiting officials, were already shifting their weight, preparing polite excuses for why this exercise would end early. Ilara adjusted the sling on her red rifle. It wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't a stunt. The color came from a heat-resistant coating she'd applied herself years ago, after a mission that ended with a barrel so hot it burned through standard polymer. The rifle had a history, just like she did. Scratches marked places where it had saved her life. The stock bore a faint dent from a helicopter door slammed shut in a hurry. It was not pretty. It was honest. "Captain," the colonel said, his voice carrying easily, "you may step aside. We'll have Lieutenant Crane demonstrate proper long-range protocol." Crane glanced at her with something close to pity. He was talented, disciplined, and absolutely certain he belonged here. Ilara nodded once, not in surrender, but acknowledgement. She knew the rules. She also knew something they didn't. "Permission to proceed," she said quietly. The colonel raised an eyebrow. "On my range?" "Yes, sir." A pause. He enjoyed this part, the power, the control. Finally, he waved a hand. "One shot, then we move on." One shot was all she had ever needed. Ilara dropped to prone. Gravel pressed into her ribs, familiar and grounding. She aligned the bipod, settled the buttstock into her shoulder, and closed her eyes. The noise faded, the murmurs, the distant engines, the quiet condescension hanging in the air. She counted her breaths, syncing them to the rhythm she'd learned not from manuals, but from fear, exhaustion, and the desperate need to be precise when mistakes cost lives. She opened her eyes. The scope showed the valley in layers, foreground blur, mid-distance clarity, far-distance distortion. Wind drifted left to right, uneven, deceptive. She remembered another valley, years ago, where wind like this had carried her team's fate on its back. She remembered the radio crackling with panic, remembered choosing to trust herself when orders came too late. Her finger rested on the trigger. Not tense, not eager, ready. The colonel crossed his arms. The shot broke the silence like thunder swallowed by distance. Recoil kissed her shoulder. The rifle settled back into place as if it, too, knew this wasn't over. No one spoke. At this range, impact took time. Seconds stretched. Someone scoffed under their breath. The colonel began to shake his head. Then the steel silhouette rang. A clean, unmistakable sound, sharp, resonant, final. The range froze. Wind flags fluttered, indifferent to the shock they'd caused. A spotter scrambled to his scope, heart pounding. "Hit," he whispered, then louder, "direct hit. Center mass." The colonel's smirk vanished. Not slowly, instantly, like it had never existed. Ilara remained still, cheek against the stock, eyes steady. She waited, not for applause, not for approval, but for the truth to settle. It always took a moment. She'd learned patience the hard way. Around her, disbelief gave way to awe, then something quieter and heavier, recognition. "That's impossible," someone muttered. "No," the spotter said, his voice tight. "It's not." The colonel stepped forward, boots crunching on gravel. He stopped just behind her, close enough that she could feel the shift in air. "Captain," he said, carefully now, "explain." She rolled onto her side and stood, brushing dust from her sleeves. "Wind correction," she said. "Barrel harmonics, ammunition temperature, and experience." "Experience," he repeated. She met his eyes. sir. There were things she didn't say. About nights spent recalibrating under fire. About being ignored until success forced attention. About how many times she'd been told to stand aside. The colonel looked at the rifle. The red coating no longer seemed amusing. It looked earned. Later, in the debriefing room, the tone had changed. Chairs were pulled closer. Questions came fast, then faster. Alara answered them all, not defensively, but generously. She spoke of preparation, of trust, in equipment, in oneself, in the team that stands behind every lone shot. When it was over, the colonel cleared his throat. Captain Voss, he said, I misjudged you. She considered correcting him. Instead, she said, you're not the first, sir. A few smiles flickered around the room, small, but real. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the range in gold, Alara returned alone to Lane 7. The target stood silent in the distance, bearing the mark of her shot. She thought of the younger officers who'd watched today, especially the ones who'd stood quietly at the back. She hoped they'd heard more than the ring of steel. She hoped they'd heard permission. Because the truth she'd learned, and now carried like a second heartbeat, was simple and hard-won. Skill does not announce itself. It waits, it listens, and when the moment comes, it speaks with undeniable clarity. The colonel's smirk was gone, but something better had taken its place, respect born not from rank or tradition, but from results. And as Alara slung her red rifle over her shoulder and walked off the range, she knew the shot had traveled farther than 3,800 meters. It had reached every place where doubt once lived, and left nothing standing.